My sister was already laughing before I even answered. That was the first thing I noticed. Natalie lifted her champagne glass and aimed that familiar smile across the table at me. The same smile she'd been perfecting since we were kids. The kind that told me she'd already decided how this moment was going to end before she'd even opened her mouth. "Tell everyone your Navy nickname," she said. 30 people turned to look at me. Natalie's future mother-in-law, Ethan's cousins from Seattle, a few of his colleagues from the consulting firm, Lauren, her maid of honor, who was already pressing her lips together like she was trying not to laugh too soon. The banquet manager standing near the entrance, who had suddenly gone very still. And across the room, though I only noticed him later when it mattered, an older man with silver hair and a straight back had stopped halfway through taking a sip of water. He was watching me with an expression I couldn't understand yet. I looked at my sister. She was glowing, white dress, soft curls, champagne catching the light. She had spent months planning this weekend, the venue, the menu, the seating arrangements, the speeches, every detail carefully controlled, including this one. "Come on," she said louder. "Don't make it awkward." And I thought, there it is. That was always Natalie's trick. Corner someone, then blame them for the walls. I folded my hands on the table. Then I said one word, "Riptide." You need to understand something about Natalie and me before any of this makes sense. We grew up in Ashland, Kentucky, in a house that was too small for the amount of conflict our family managed to create. My mother, Carol, worked as a legal assistant and believed keeping the peace was more important than almost anything else. More important than honesty, more important than fairness, more important than her own comfort. My father left when I was 10 and Natalie was 13. After that, maintaining the appearance of a happy family became my mother's full-time occupation. Natalie understood how that system worked very early. She learned that if she smiled at the right moments and blamed someone else quickly enough, she could escape almost any consequence. She was charming, quick, beautiful, and people wanted to believe her. Teachers, boys, extended family members who only saw us during holidays. Me? I was the difficult one, the stubborn one, the one who couldn't let things go, the one who made everything complicated by refusing to pretend nothing had happened. By the time I was 17, that dynamic had an official name in our house. Rachel being difficult. I enlisted in the Navy when I was 20, not because I was desperate. I had a partial scholarship waiting for me at the University of Kentucky. I enlisted because I wanted to belong somewhere that required me to be exactly who I was. No performance, no pretending, no maintaining appearances. Just work. Competence. Truth. The Navy gave me that. It also gave me the nickname. I was stationed aboard the USS Harry S. Truman, working as an aviation boatswain's mate. We were responsible for the choreography of flight deck operations, one of the most dangerous working environments in the world outside active combat. There is no room for hesitation on a flight deck. You learn to recognize a situation before it has completely unfolded. You learn to move before someone has to tell you. My chief, Petty Officer First Class Daniel Brooks, had been in the Navy for 14 years. About 5 months into my deployment, he started calling me Riptide. I asked him about it once. He was eating a breakfast sandwich and barely looked up. "Riptide doesn't fight the water," he said. "It is the water. You don't see it coming, and once it's there, you can't stop it." He took another bite. "That's you." The name stayed. To the people I served with, it wasn't a joke. It was recognition. A shorthand for something they had watched me earn. But Natalie had heard the word Riptide once. 3 years earlier, during Thanksgiving dinner, I had made the mistake of mentioning it. She laughed then, too. She said it sounded like the name of a character from a cheap television drama. She said I was always so serious about military things. She didn't know what the name meant. She didn't want to know. And now she had decided to turn it into a punchline at her rehearsal dinner, in front of her fiancé's family. In a room full of people who would laugh because she was the bride, and brides own the room. I knew that because I knew Natalie. What I didn't know was that Walter Hayes was sitting across that room, and that the word Riptide meant something very specific to a former Navy corpsman from an entirely different generation. The laughter started the moment the word left my mouth. Natalie laughed first, that bright, performative laugh she saved for audiences. Then the laughter moved around the table. Ethan's cousins, several of his coworkers. Even Lauren smiled, though she glanced at me apologetically while she did it. "Riptide?" Natalie repeated. "That sounds like a rejected superhero name." More laughter. Someone near the other end of the table repeated it. Riptide. What was the other option? Natalie continued, clearly enjoying herself now. Commander? She paused. Captain Spreadsheet? The table loved that one. I stayed still, hands folded, shoulders level, face neutral. The Navy teaches you that too. There are moments on a flight deck when everything goes wrong at once. The wind changes, a cable catches, an aircraft suddenly moves in a direction it was never supposed to move. And the worst thing you can do is allow your body to announce panic before your brain has finished solving the problem. So you learn stillness. You learn to let the storm happen around you while your mind keeps working. That was what I was doing now. My mother's hand found my forearm beneath the table. She leaned toward me. Just let it go, she whispered. I turned and looked at her slowly. Why? I asked quietly. Why is that always my job? She didn't answer. She never answered that question. Because answering honestly would require admitting that letting things go had been her strategy for more than 30 years. And that strategy had cost both of us things we still didn't know how to name. Natalie was still talking. She had turned toward Ethan now, using him as part of her routine, leaning against his shoulder with exaggerated disbelief. Can you imagine they actually called her that? She shook her head. The military is so. That was when I heard it. A glass touching the table. Soft, deliberate, the opposite of accidental. I looked across the room. The older man with silver hair had set down his water glass. Both of his hands rested flat against the table. And he was looking at my sister with an expression I can only describe as recognition. Not recognition of her. Recognition of something she had just said. Something she had accidentally revealed about herself. I didn't know who he was yet. I'd been introduced to nearly 40 members of Ethan's extended family and professional circle during the previous 24 hours. The names had blurred together, but I noticed his posture, military straight, even in his 70s. And I noticed that his face had become completely still. Not confused, not offended. Recognition. He pushed his chair backward. The sound of the chair legs scraping against the hardwood floor cut through the laughter. Every head turned. The man stood slowly. He wasn't tall anymore. Age compresses people. But when he stood, the entire room seemed to reorganize itself around him. It had nothing to do with height. It was something else. Something people who have spent their lives in service carry in the way they stand. He looked directly at my sister. Apologize, he said. The word landed in complete silence. Natalie blinked. Her champagne glass was still raised. The smile was still on her face, but it had frozen there now, confused. What? She said. Apologize. His voice was calm. It didn't rise. It didn't shake. There was no performance in it, no theatrics, no anger. And I think that was what made it frightening. Anger can be dismissed. Calm like that cannot. Natalie forced a laugh. Uncle Walter, come on, it was just a joke. Uncle Walter, Ethan's uncle. I filed that information away. No, Walter said. It wasn't. Natalie looked around the table. It was a reflex. The same thing she'd always done. The thing my mother had trained both of us to recognize automatically. The find an ally scan. Look for the face that will smile back. Look for the person who will laugh. The person who will break the tension. The person who will make everything okay. She searched 30 faces. No one smiled. Not Ethan. He was looking at his uncle with something like understanding slowly appearing in his expression. Not his parents. They had both gone completely straight in their chairs. Not the cousins who had been laughing 2 minutes earlier. Not Lauren. She was suddenly very interested in the food on her plate. Natalie was alone in the middle of the joke she'd created. I didn't mean anything by it, she said. Her voice was smaller now, a register I hadn't heard since we were children. Before she'd learned that volume could replace vulnerability. Walter's jaw tightened. That, he said, is what people say when they want the damage without the responsibility. Ethan shifted in his chair. He leaned slightly toward Lauren, who was sitting 2 seats away. Lauren, he said quietly, did Natalie plan this before dinner? Lauren went pale. The word planned sat in the air between them. Lauren, Ethan's voice was careful. Please. Lauren looked at Natalie. Natalie's eyes found hers across the table, and I watched an entire conversation pass between them in about 2 seconds. Don't you dare. I'm asking you as your best friend, as the woman whose bridesmaid dress you already paid for. Don't. Lauren looked down at her plate. Then she said it anyway. She said the Navy nickname joke would kill. The table went cold. Not quiet. Cold. There's a difference. Quiet is absence. Cold is presence. Cold is 30 people processing the same information at the same time, arriving at the same conclusion, and no one wanting to be the first person to say it aloud. Natalie's face cracked. It happened in stages, the way things break under pressure. Not all at once, in sequence. First, the smile disappeared, then the ease left her shoulders, then something behind her eyes shifted. Performance became panic. Ethan stood slowly, not dramatically. He didn't shove his chair backward. He didn't knock anything over. He simply stood. The way someone stands when they've made a decision and need their body to confirm it. He didn't shout. He didn't look around to see who was watching. He wasn't doing this for the room. "I need a minute," he said. "You're walking out?" Natalie's voice had dropped to a whisper. "During our rehearsal dinner?" "I'm taking a minute." He looked at her, not with anger. And I think that was what finally started to undo her. There was no anger in his expression, just something quiet, something final, the expression of someone reconsidering something they thought they understood. "Because I don't want to say what I'm thinking in front of everyone," he said. Then he turned toward me. "Rachel, I'm sorry." He followed Walter out of the room. The door closed quietly behind them. Natalie stood at the front of the room, dressed perfect, hair perfect, champagne glass still in her hand, but it had stopped being a prop. Now it was simply something she was holding because she didn't know what else to do with her hands. The room no longer belonged to her. I've thought about that moment many times since then, about what it looks like when someone loses a room. It isn't what you'd expect. It isn't dramatic. It's a kind of subtraction. One by one, without moving, the people around you simply stop being your audience. My mother had one hand covering her mouth. I didn't know if she was horrified by Natalie or horrified by herself, by all the years of telling me to just let things go. Natalie turned toward me, and for the first time that entire evening, maybe for the first time in years, her face was simply her face. There was no performance underneath it. "This is unbelievable," she said. Her voice was small. I picked up my water glass, took a slow sip, set it down. "You knew I said no," I said. I hadn't planned to speak. But the words were already there, and I was tired of swallowing them. "I told you last week, when you asked if you could mention the Navy stuff during the speeches, I said no." I looked directly at her. "I told you some of those names carry weight. I asked you to trust me." My voice stayed even. I'd learned that from the flight deck, too. "You kept going because the room was laughing with you." No one moved. "You laughed at the name," I said. "I remember the people attached to it." Natalie opened her mouth. Nothing came out. And into that silence came Walter's voice from the doorway. He had returned quietly. He was standing just inside the room. I didn't know how long he'd been there. Long enough, I think. "What did they call you that for?" he asked me. Not unkindly. Curious. The way someone asks when they already suspect the answer. "Flight deck operations," I said. "USS Harry S. Truman." I paused. "My chief said I moved like I could see things before they happened." Walter nodded slowly. Then he said something that changed the temperature of the room again. "There was a woman on one of our support ships in 1981, he said. "They called her Riptide." He looked at me. "Hospital Corpsman Second Class Rebecca Lawson." He paused. "She pulled 2 men out of a flooding compartment during a systems failure near the Philippine Sea. Nobody ordered her to. Nobody had time to. She just moved." Walter looked at Natalie. "We don't give names like that as jokes." The room was completely silent. Natalie sat down. My phone buzzed at 11:37 that night. I was in my hotel room, room 308 at the Carlton Inn. The yellow light from the bedside lamp filled half the room. Outside, I could hear water moving through the fountain in the courtyard. I was eating crackers from the vending machine because the rehearsal dinner had ended nearly 2 hours early, and I hadn't finished my dinner. The message was from Natalie. "You embarrassed me in front of Ethan's family." I read it twice. Then I put my phone on the nightstand. It buzzed again. "I hope you're happy." I looked at the ceiling. I thought about Rebecca Lawson. Hospital Corpsman Second Class. A woman I'd never met. A flooding compartment. The Philippine Sea. 1981. I thought about the expression on Walter's face when he'd said her name. The specific weight of it. The way you say the name of someone who saved a life. Someone whose story you've been carrying for decades. I thought about Daniel Brooks handing me a breakfast sandwich. You don't see it coming, and once it's there, you can't stop it. I thought about every time I'd let something go. Then I turned the phone face down and went to sleep. The knock came at 7:19 the next morning. I know the exact time because I'd been awake since 6, running calculations, thinking about how this would go, what I was willing to do, what I wasn't willing to do, where my boundaries were. Now that I'd finally decided I was allowed to have them. I opened the door. Natalie was standing there in her bridal robe, ivory, monogrammed. The one she'd shown me a picture of months earlier when she'd ordered it. Her makeup was only half finished, mascara on one eye, foundation stopping near her jaw. She looked like she'd started getting ready, and then stopped when she realized there was something more urgent she needed to handle. "I'm sorry if you felt mocked," she said. I looked at her. For a long time. "That's not an apology," I said. "That's a press release." Her jaw tightened. "I'm trying. An apology for what you did sounds like this." I kept my voice calm. "I planned to humiliate you in front of Ethan's family. You asked me not to, and I did it anyway because I thought I could get away with it." I looked directly at her. "That's what happened. That's what you'd be apologizing for. It was one joke. You told Lauren it would kill." I kept my voice level. "You workshopped it. She didn't deny it. And the fact that she didn't deny it was its own kind of admission." "It is my wedding day," she said. Her voice changed, softer now, appealing to something older than the argument. Some basic contract between sisters she assumed still existed. "I know," I said, "and I genuinely want to be there. But if you want me standing beside you today, you're going to apologize in front of Ethan, Walter, and Mom. Publicly. For what you actually did." Natalie went rigid. "Absolutely not." "Then I won't be your bridesmaid." The silence stretched between us. I watched her face move through several emotions: disbelief, anger. The beginning of an argument. Something that might have been real hurt underneath all of it. I'd spent my entire life learning to read Natalie's face. I knew every version, and buried beneath everything else, I saw someone who had finally done the math and didn't like the answer. Then her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen, and I watched the color drain from her face. "It's Ethan," she whispered. "What does he say?" She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes moved across the screen twice, once quickly, then again, slowly. When she finally looked up, the last traces of the woman from the rehearsal dinner were gone. The smile that had owned the room, the ease, the certainty that everything would rearrange itself around her if she performed confidently enough. Gone. "He wants to meet before the ceremony," she said quietly. "Just you?" She shook her head. "He wants Walter there too." I learned what happened in that meeting from 3 people: Ethan, Walter, and eventually Natalie herself. About 6 weeks later, during a conversation I'll get to, Ethan had spent most of the night talking to his uncle, Walter Hayes, Lieutenant Commander retired, 25 years as a Navy corpsman. He had served with men and women who'd earned names like the one Natalie had turned into a punchline. He'd watched that name stripped of its weight in front of 30 people. And then he'd spent 2 hours with Ethan explaining, carefully and without drama, what he'd seen when I said that word. He'd seen someone who had learned to stay still when everything around her was moving. He'd seen someone who had been expected to laugh along and hadn't. He'd seen the second part of the question Natalie had never bothered to ask. Not what is your nickname, but what did you do to earn it? Ethan, meanwhile, had spent the night asking himself a different question. He'd always known Natalie liked to perform. He'd thought it was charm. He'd thought the edge she sometimes developed when she had an audience was just excitement. High spirits. The version of Natalie that appeared when she was happy and confident and feeling good. Now he was reconsidering whether planning to humiliate her sister and then blaming that sister for the consequences still fit within the definition of high spirits. When Ethan texted Natalie that morning, he asked her to meet him for breakfast. Just the 3 of them. Natalie, Ethan, Walter. I know what she walked into because Ethan told me later. Carefully, without adding his own judgment. Walter had one question for her. He asked it before she'd even finished sitting down. "When Rachel said no to you last week," Walter said, "what did you think she meant?" Natalie didn't answer immediately. "I thought she was being oversensitive," she finally said. "About a name she earned," Walter said. "About a joke." Walter looked at her for a long time. "I've known many people who use that word," he said. "Joke." He paused. "It's remarkable how much ground people expect it to cover." Ethan told me Natalie started crying then. Real crying. Not the kind she used during arguments. Not strategic tears. The kind that comes when someone who has been certain for a very long time finally encounters something that refuses to move. Walter didn't comfort her. He let her sit with it. Then he said, "There's a version of this marriage that works. But it requires you to decide whether your husband is allowed to have a family you haven't approved, and whether your sister is allowed to have a life you haven't edited." Natalie wiped her eyes. "What if I can't do that?" she asked. "Then you find that out now," Walter said, "instead of 5 years from now." The wedding happened. I want to be clear about that, because I think part of you, the The part that came here expecting an explosion, a canceled wedding, some complete disaster, might be waiting for something else. The wedding happened. Natalie walked down the aisle. She was beautiful. Ethan was crying before she was halfway there. The good kind of crying. The kind that makes everyone else in the room understand that this is real. I stood in my place. Second bridesmaid. Dark green dress, beige heels, a small bouquet of white roses. But before we went to the venue, before the hair and makeup, before the flowers, before the buttonholes and photographs and all the choreography of the day, Natalie knocked on my hotel room door a second time. 7:53 a.m. I know because I'd never gone back to sleep. She was still wearing the robe. She'd given up on finishing her makeup. Her eyes were red. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped away from the door. She sat on the edge of the bed. I sat in the chair beside the window. We were quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that had been building for a long time. The kind that carries weight. "I planned it," she said. "You were right. I thought it would be funny. And I thought you'd laugh along because that's what you do. That's what you've always done." I didn't say anything. "And I knew you'd said no," she continued. "I knew that. And I did it anyway because I thought—" She stopped. "I thought the room laughing would make it okay. I thought if enough people laughed, then it couldn't be cruel. It would just be a joke, and you'd have to let it go." She looked down at her hands. "I've been doing that my whole life," she said, "getting people to laugh so I don't have to be accountable." I thought about every version of this conversation we'd never had. Every year of just let it go. "Rachel, you're too sensitive. Rachel, she didn't mean it. Rachel." Every corner I'd been pushed into, and then blamed for standing in. "I know," I said. "I'm sorry," she said. "Not if you felt—" She stopped, then started again. "I'm sorry for what I did." Her voice shook. It was cruel, and it was planned, and I'm sorry. The room was very quiet. Outside, I could hear the fountain in the courtyard. "Okay," I said. "Okay doesn't fix everything. We have years of this behind us. One conversation doesn't repair years. But it's a start." She nodded. "Walter asked Ethan something this morning," she said. "He asked Ethan if he thought I could change." "What did Ethan say?" "He said he thought I could. If I wanted to." She looked up at me. "He said the real question was whether I wanted to." I looked at my sister, really looked at her. The way you sometimes can't when you're trapped inside old patterns, inside the grooves of who you've always been to each other. She looked exhausted, and younger than she'd looked in years, and more like herself than she'd been the night before in that white dress with the champagne glass. "That sounds like a contradiction." "It isn't." "Do you?" I asked. "Want to?" She was quiet for a long time. "I think so," she said. "I think I've just—" She stopped again. "I got very good at being a version of myself I don't think I actually like." I have to tell you about Walter, because this story isn't complete without him. After the reception, after the first dances, the speeches, the cake, the entire long, beautiful afternoon, I found him sitting outside on the back terrace of the venue, a glass of water in his hand, watching the sun do something extravagant over the hills. I sat beside him. We stayed quiet for a while, the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. "Thank you," I said eventually, "for last night." He waved it away. That small dismissive gesture older men make, the one that means don't mention it. And somehow also means of course. "What was her name?" I asked. "The woman you mentioned. Rebecca Lawson." "Becca." He smiled slightly. "She hated Rebecca. What happened to her?" "Retired in 92. Lives in Jacksonville. Has 7 grandchildren. And she's been fighting with her homeowners association for 3 years over a flagpole in her front yard." He looked sideways at me. "She's fine." "She turned out fine." I thought about that. Hospital Corpsman Second Class Rebecca Lawson. 1981. A flooding compartment in the Philippine Sea. More than 40 years later. 7 grandchildren. And a fight with her homeowners association. "Did you stay in touch?" I asked. "Christmas cards." He looked back toward the sunset. "Some things you don't let go of. Not because they haunt you, because they mattered." We sat there a little longer. "You moved like her," he said. "Last night, when everything went sideways. The way you stayed still." He paused. "That's not nothing." "No," I said. "It's not." He nodded. We watched the sun disappear. 6 weeks after the wedding, Natalie called me on a Tuesday evening. Not a text, an actual phone call, which, in our family, was reserved for emergencies. Or apparently something like this. She told me she'd started seeing a therapist, Dr. Melissa Carter. She said the name deliberately, like saying it aloud made her accountable to it. She told me she'd spent most of the first 2 sessions crying about our childhood, and Dr. Carter had told her that the humor she'd used her entire life had started as a coping mechanism, then hardened into a weapon. That she'd spent so long learning how to make people laugh that she'd forgotten how to make them trust her. She asked me when you stopped trusting me, Natalie said. What did you say? I told her I wasn't sure I'd ever started. There was a pause. She said that was the most honest thing I'd said in 2 sessions. I didn't say anything. I don't know how to do this, Natalie said. She searched for the word. The version where I actually tell you what's happening. Where I don't turn everything into a performance. I know, I said. Me neither. We never learned how. Mom was useless on that front. Yeah. A long pause, but it was comfortable, different from our old silences, newer. Will you teach me? She asked. Teach you what? How to do the... She almost laughed. God, this sounds ridiculous. But how to stay still the way you did at the rehearsal dinner. I thought about Daniel Brooks and his breakfast sandwich. I thought about the flight deck of the Truman. The wind, the noise, the controlled choreography of extraordinary danger made routine through practice. I thought about a woman named Becca Lawson, a flooding compartment, the Philippine Sea, 1981, a woman who turned out fine. Yeah, I said. I can do that. Natalie didn't stop being my sister. She's still working on stopping being the version of herself she learned to survive with. Walter Hayes sent me a Christmas card in December. Inside, he'd written one line, "Some currents leave marks on the seafloor. That's not damage.